Love at first sight, a happy marriage, a secure life, what could go wrong? Everything can collapse in one day. That's how it usually happens in life. I regret that I was soft and trusting. I do not know why, but I wanted to believe my cheating wife. But sooner or later, everything comes to an end with rather cruel consequences. The mole mob, which instilled fear in our quaint Scandinavian town, was perhaps the most amusing joke to have graced our town in its 1,000-year existence. It all started with an article in the local newspaper penned by a man named Rupert Albert Timmer, calling for the immediate closure of the beloved dance hall in town. It wouldn't have mattered much if Rupert had been just another face in the crowd, but unfortunately, he was the leader of the second most influential political party in the town council. Rupert, a staunch teetotaler and prominent member of the local cultural society, garnered support for his ludicrous proposals even from some members of opposing parties, much to the annoyance of us young revelers. One of the few redeeming qualities about Rupert was his exceptionally beautiful daughter, Madeline, who happened to be in my class at school. Regrettably, all my attempts to ask her out were met with harsh rejections and scathing remarks about partygoers. My name's Robert Johnson, and at the outset of this tale, myself and a group of 7 childhood buddies had just embarked on our final year of studies at the gymnasium, equivalent to upper high school in the U.S. We were fortunate to have a club room in the basement of a building where one of our pals' father worked as a janitor. It was the perfect spot for us to gather, indulge in some cheap booze procured with fake IDs, before hitting the dance floor on Saturday nights. After a few drinks one Saturday evening, we decided that Rupert, or the Rat, as he was known behind his back, deserved some comeuppance. After tossing around a few wild ideas, we settled on a simple plan. Rupert fancied himself as an amateur gardener, particularly proud of his king-size pears. So we crafted and dispatched a letter to him which read, "Dear friend Rupert, it has come to my attention that the notorious law-breaking mole mob has sold all of your delectable pears to an illicit winemaker. Please ensure that all the pears remain where they are, lest the mole mob exact severe punishment upon you for pilfering their property. Sincerely, your loyal supporter and friend." Being a law-abiding citizen, Rupert went straight to the police to request protection, which was declined due to practical reasons, leading to a heated argument from Rupert. At that moment, a journalist from the local newspaper happened to arrive and got the story of the year. The following day, the front page of the local newspaper featured a photo of an enraged Rupert with the headline, "Rat Fight in Our Town." Well-known politician Rupert A. Timmer, also known as the Rat, was assaulted by a gang of criminal moles. The mole mob alleges possession of the Rat's award-winning pears and claims to be selling them to a winemaker. The police are doing their best but lack the manpower to provide 24/7 protection for Mr. Timmer's garden. To most, it seemed like a trivial news story, not to be taken seriously. Rupert reportedly caused quite a stir at the newspaper's office, invested heavily in alarm systems, and spent many sleepless nights guarding his pears. However, the Rat story had an unexpected but intriguing side effect. Local opinion began to blame the mysterious mole mob for all unsolved crimes in our town. We, the innocent guys, always found amusement whenever we heard those exaggerated tales of the mole mob's criminal escapades, usually blown out of proportion. About 2 months after that now infamous newspaper article detailing Rupert's pear debacle, trouble stirred again. Our local police force welcomed a new chief, a staunch advocate of law and order, who pledged to be the one to lock up the entire mole mob. Many of our gang members were involved in varying degrees of romantic entanglements, leading to our pre-Saturday evening drinking sessions at the club, nearly becoming a thing of the past. However, one evening we convened to plan a grand party, and the antics of the new police chief sparked numerous derisive remarks. Eventually, we unanimously agreed that it was our duty to have some fun at the expense of this foolish man. The gathering concluded with a pact and solemn vows that our mole mob would henceforth operate as a clandestine brotherhood, offering assistance to any of us encountering difficulties. We even meticulously devised plans for our grand party, and strategies to mock the police chief mercilessly. Our plan exceeded expectations. Rupert the Rat was lured with the promise of receiving confidential information regarding secret bribes to certain politicians. The rendezvous was set in a secluded area of the main town park. Coincidentally, the police chief was tipped off about the presence of the mole mob leader in the same location. When they crossed paths, Rupert attempted to flee, believing he was being targeted by the mole mob for a mugging. Unfortunately for him, he was swiftly apprehended and handcuffed by the police. However, this incident spiraled into the worst scandal our town had seen, leading to the resignation of the police chief, who subsequently found employment far north. Rupert, facing public backlash, withdrew from politics altogether. 6 years later. Time has flown by, and there was quite a shock for many people in our town when I, Robert Johnson, married the lovely daughter of Rupert Timmer, Madeleine. Naturally, it was clear to me that Madeleine's parents didn't see me as the ideal match for their daughter, despite my job as an engineer at the Municipal Central Heating Company. They were faced with a choice between two undesirable options: accepting me as their son-in-law or preferring their daughter to become an unmarried mother. The courtship of Madeleine. A buddy of mine, Dan Peterson, along with his close friend Nicholas, managed to snag 2 rooms for a 2-week stay at a small, budget-friendly hotel in one of our most popular summer destinations. This place was famous for the wild parties frequented by celebrities during July vacations, so it wasn't surprising they'd find 2 attractive girls to join them. However, Nicholas had to skip the trip due to a work promotion, leaving Dan in need of a replacement. He asked me, and I readily agreed, canceling my other plans. The girl meant to accompany Nicholas was Madeleine Timmer, the daughter of Rupert Timmer, who had recently broken off her engagement with a wealthy boyfriend due to his infidelity. I didn't have high hopes for getting anywhere with Madeleine, just like back in school. But who cared? She wasn't the only option at the resort. There were plenty of other attractive girls to meet. Our arrival at the hotel brought the first hiccup when Madeleine insisted on sharing a room with Dan and me, leaving the other girl alone. The following day, Madeleine and I got along very well as the 4 of us stuck together, whether at the beach or partying at a bar that first evening. On our second evening, along with several other couples, we headed to the seaside rocks to watch the sunset during a picnic, enjoying the popular combination of white wine and shrimp. It was a delightful, warm evening and everyone was in good spirits. Then the girls proposed a 50-kilometer shopping trip to a well-known factory outlet the next day because the weather forecast predicted thunder and rain. Dan, whose car we were using for our excursion, was in a cheerful and flirtatious mood, responding, "Sure, my ladies, no problem at all if you give us a little something right here and now." Madeleine initially raised some objections, but another girl objected. "What's so special about that?" Then she grabbed Dan. After hesitating for a moment, Madeleine also exclaimed, "Why not?" and grabbed me. It took me a while to believe what was happening. Back at the hotel, Madeleine and Dan switched rooms. Once again, Madeleine surprised everyone by stating, "Even I got turned on by the rock, so now you owe me amazing intimacy." The current Madeleine Timmer was very different from the arrogant person I remembered from our school days. Perhaps 2 of her ex-boyfriends, whom she dated for a long time, taught her some wisdom before she broke up with them for unspecified reasons. However, she didn't hesitate to ask me about it once. In less than a minute, we were already in bed. Eventually, after several sessions, she whispered, "My God, I never imagined that making love to you could be so divine." It was amazing to hear these words from a man who had 2 long-term affairs. From that moment on, we became a couple and continued to date even after those romantic weeks of summer vacation. Despite not taking birth control, a condom accident led to her pregnancy before her powerful father, Rupert Timmer, convinced her to break up with me. I didn't shy away from confronting what had happened with her and felt proud when my friends admired me for having an attractive trophy wife. That is, until our first child reached daycare age and she resumed working. That is when I got to truly know Madeleine. She was still stunningly beautiful, but unfortunately she transformed into a real nagging partner. You might wonder, why on earth did I marry someone like that and stay married? There's a good reason for it. Alexander, our child. Today I must admit that a weaker man might have bolted from such a relationship immediately, but my role as a father made it impossible for me to take that step. However, a strained relationship worsened. During her youth, Madeline excelled as a swimmer, earning several district championships. At a reunion organized by her former swim club, she returned home intoxicated around 6 in the morning. Raised by non-drinking parents, she typically exercised caution with alcohol, so witnessing her in such a state surprised me, especially after becoming parents with Alexander. Her explanation of enjoying a nightcap in a hotel room with out-of-town friends seemed dubious yet possibly innocent. However, about 10 days later, things took a turn when a phone call came from one of the old moles. He informed me, "I'm at the bar in the Ritz Hotel, where Sebastian Nolberg, famously known as the Zero, is loudly boasting to everyone about sleeping with your wife Madeleine at a recent gathering of old swimmers." "I'll be right there," I replied. Then I called out to Madeline, "The Zero is at the Ritz bar, bragging about being with you at the swimmer party. He must have been quite something to keep you there all night." Madeline became enraged and yelled back, "That's a complete fabrication. I'm coming with you to get the truth out of that slimy creep." Even though Zero was a talented swimmer in his youth, once a national champion, nowadays he's better known as a local Casanova. Despite being divorced 3 times, he still manages to charm married women, often much older than him, with his mediocre standards and well-maintained physique. We left our child with the neighbors and raced to the Ritz as fast as we could. Although Madeline was furious about Zero's boasting, I suspect she even wanted to shield him from my anger, knowing full well what I was capable of doing to jerks who harassed her. At the golf club Christmas party, I witnessed an unsettling incident. A local pro, clearly inebriated, made unwanted advances towards Madeline on the dance floor, despite her attempts to resist. I intervened, much to his displeasure, and he later threatened retaliation. His opportunity arose when I was engaged in conversation at the bar. The pro, now aggressive and accompanied by the greenkeeper, approached me. Realizing that a surprise attack was my only recourse, I swiftly incapacitated the greenkeeper with a powerful punch. This caught the pro off guard, allowing me to deliver a decisive blow. With him sprawled on the ground, the altercation ended, diffused by the arrival of other guests. I'm certain that Madeline recalled that incident because as we arrived at the bar she insisted, "Don't do anything. Please refrain from doing anything. I'll extract the truth from him." It was evident she hadn't forgotten my previous encounter with the golf club staff. Zero was still at the bar when we arrived. Madeline hurried to the booth where he sat with his friends. She slapped him and exclaimed loudly, "You're boasting about sleeping with me, is that true? Answer me, is it?" Taken aback, he glanced at me and responded quietly, No, of course not." Unsatisfied, Madeline slapped him again and yelled, "Announce to everyone here, did you sleep with me at the swimmer party? Speak up so everyone can hear." Zero replied louder, No, I never slept with you. I merely mentioned to my friends that I dreamt about it. Just a dream, nothing real." She slapped him once more and cried out, "You're despicable for trying to sabotage my marriage." A multitude of individuals intervened, positioning themselves between Zero and me, rendering it impossible for me to take any action against him. Madeline and I subsequently returned home. Admittedly, Zero's boasting about the swimmer party night aroused some suspicions in my mind regarding what could have transpired. However, I saw no viable path for further investigation. It's no exaggeration to say that this incident exacerbated my already strained marriage, particularly when Zero was later assaulted, and I inquired of Madeline whether she had visited him in the hospital with flowers. When a spouse incessantly complains and nags, even the most patient person may retaliate. Time passed until Madeline added the final straw during a barbecue at her parents' home. Among the 18 guests, mostly acquaintances of her parents, I found myself in unfamiliar company. Prior to the meal, I had been assisting Rupert with the grill when Madeline criticized the meat, leading to a loud outburst during the meal where she remarked, "I'm sorry, but my incompetent husband can't seem to handle anything right, including cooking." Now, the term meat could have referred to either the grill or my manhood, one being a crude insult and the other a deeply offensive one. As I stood up from my chair, everyone's eyes fixed on me. With determination in my voice, I addressed her. "Why are we still together if I can't satisfy you? Madeline, I want a divorce so you can pursue Sebastian Nolberg or that horny golf pro who can grill your meat better than I can. I'm tired of your infidelity and constant nagging. Say thank you to them for me. Goodbye, everyone." No one, not even Rupert, uttered a word as I left with my son and drove home. To my surprise, Madeline arrived home only half an hour later, but she was a different person. Instead of the enraged tiger I expected, she was more like a small kitten. She cried, admitting she had only complained about my grilling and regretted insulting me while I was helping her father. She begged for forgiveness and promised to be a better wife in the future. An hour later, I agreed to listen to her side of our problems. She cried and admitted, "It's not your fault that I've been difficult towards you. It's my own fault and disappointment because I had such big plans for my future, with traveling to exotic places and working abroad. All my dreams fell apart when I got pregnant, and abortion wasn't an option. I resigned myself to my fate until I started working again. Then everything felt like a prison, and you were the warden. Why didn't you tell me about this earlier so we could have divorced sooner? I could have taken custody of Alexander, and you could have pursued your dreams." Through tears, Madeline pleaded, "I don't want a divorce. You and Alexander mean everything to me. Please, let us stay together as a family. I promise to be a better wife if you'll forgive me and give me a second chance." I asked her, "What do you really want? This is your great opportunity to change your life and make your dreams come true. Why hesitate now when you could leave behind such an insignificant person like me and start a happy, lonely existence traveling the world?" In her desperate attempt to get a second chance, Madeline even offered to do something to her for her unpleasant behavior at the barbecue. But that's not my style, so I just declined the offer, saying, "No thanks." Nevertheless, an hour later, she managed to convince me to give her a 3-month probation period so that she would get a second chance to become a better spouse. On that unforgettable night, Madeline really proved herself as a spouse. We began our first day in our new happy marriage with a tender, morning lovemaking session that lasted. If our relationship outside the bedroom is as good, our troubles would be over. Everything was smooth until she missed her next period, and a pregnancy test confirmed it. She was pregnant. Throughout her pregnancy and the year she stayed home with the child, we remained a genuinely happy family. Madeline used that time for evening classes, and I must admit she excelled at it. Upon returning to work, she was encouraged to apply for a managerial position, and to everyone's surprise, including her own, she got it. It meant a lot for her and our family. She received a company car and even a slightly higher salary than mine. In most families, this would be a positive development, but due to Rupert, not in ours. At the same time, he sold his house for a very good price and promised to give half of that money to Madeline and our children. Rupert being Rupert, it wasn't without conditions. Rupert insisted that Madeline and I divide all our assets, so our house became legally shared on tax and court records. However, we were to maintain separate finances, with me excluded from access to the children's and Madeline's funds. I didn't mind being excluded from Madeline's funds, but I found it insulting to be kept out of the children's finances. When I expressed my frustration to Rupert about his interference in our family's finances, I even jokingly suggested he put his money where the sun doesn't shine. Rupert brushed off my comments, but his wife, who overheard everything, left immediately and refused to speak to me for several months. Madeline and I had a significant disagreement about Rupert's involvement, because she valued her father's gift greatly, whereas I strongly opposed letting Rupert the rat interfere in our family affairs. After several heated arguments, I finally agreed to Madeline's suggestion that both of us would contribute an equal percentage of our salary each month to a shared account for family expenses, with the remainder for personal use. The children's funds, though modest, would be jointly managed. With the dispute resolved, our relationship returned to a happy family dynamic, albeit with Madeline's parents and I avoiding each other as much as possible, which suited me fine. Madeline called me at work one Thursday afternoon, saying her colleagues had convinced her to join them for an after-work chat at a nearby pub for a couple of hours. She wanted to make sure it was okay with me. I asked why they were meeting on a Thursday instead of the usual Friday, and she explained that married people preferred to have Friday fun with their children on Friday evenings. It made sense to me, so I didn't ask any more questions. The following Thursday, she informed me in the morning that they were planning another after-work outing that evening, which I was fine with. Everything was going smoothly at home until 6 o'clock when our daughter Matilda accidentally cut her hand on a flower vase. She was bleeding heavily and needed stitches at the hospital. I quickly arranged a babysitter for our son Alexander with our neighbor and called Madeline's cell phone. After several attempts, Madeline finally answered, and I informed her about the situation. I told her that Matilda was crying for her and asked if she was sober enough to drive to the hospital. She assured me she was, and we agreed to meet there. As I rushed to the hospital, a nagging sensation gnawed at me, suggesting Matilda's accident wasn't the sole misfortune of the evening. After much reflection, the answer struck me like lightning. Madeline's response to my call. It wasn't just the delay, but the eerie silence on her end. There were no background bar noises indicating she wasn't in a crowded place when she took my call. We convened at the emergency room where Madeline agreed to stay with Matilda while I returned home to care for Alexander. This dreadful Thursday likely marked the worst day of both mine and my children's lives. Matilda's few stitches were trivial compared to the realization that Madeline was undoubtedly hiding something from me. I resolved to gather evidence and initiate divorce proceedings in the near future, feeling convinced that nothing could thwart my decision this time. At the moment I laid eyes on her in the hospital, my irreversible decision to divorce her was made. A brief glance was all it took to confirm beyond any doubt that my phone call had interrupted her affair and pulled her from the bed where it was occurring. Credit must be given to Madeline for swiftly attending to her appearance when her child needed her. True to my expectations, Madeline headed straight for the shower upon returning home. She didn't mention the interrupted after work, and I refrained from asking, preferring to gather more information about her potential infidelity before taking action. My opportunity would likely arise the following day, a Friday, when Madeline's parents would take her and Alexander for a weekend trip to Legoland, a renowned amusement park in Denmark. I opted to remain at home with Matilda, who was too young to accompany me. This suited me well, since Madeline had a seminar booked at a luxurious hotel for the upcoming Thursday and Friday, and I required more information beforehand. On Friday evening, while Matilda was asleep, I commenced my investigation in our study, where we had 2 desks positioned against a wall. Madeline's laptop sat on her desk as usual, but I found it to be password protected. After several unsuccessful attempts, I abandoned the endeavor. Hacking passwords isn't my forte. Unfortunately, her laptop, which likely held all the answers, remained a mystery. Madeline called to inform me they had arrived at the hotel. She briefly inquired about Matilda's well-being before abruptly ending the call. Undeterred, I persisted in my search. My next obstacle was the locked drawers in her desk. The locks were rather rudimentary, so I fashioned a makeshift tool from a bent pin and began to pick the locks, also making slight modifications to the spare key that fit my own drawers. According to an old adage, giving up is a disgrace, and I adhered to that belief, which ultimately paid off. After some time, my persistence bore fruit when the first lock yielded, though the contents of the drawer were underwhelming, save for a folder containing informational papers for her upcoming conference. Despite the lack of interest in subsequent drawers, it was evident that the conference was legitimate, not a sham. However, It was in the third and final drawer that I struck gold. Upon opening a small plastic box, I discovered 4 condoms, likely from our nightstand, and a mysterious blue pill. I had never felt the need for such blue pills, and it seemed neither had Madeline's lover, as she must have sought them elsewhere to ensure a satisfactory performance during the conference. Madeline had temporarily stopped taking birth control pills for medical reasons, so we had been relying on condoms from my nightstand until her doctor could find a solution. I had purchased a large supply, so I hadn't noticed any shortage. Furthermore, I stumbled upon a USB memory stick in that drawer, which I examined on my laptop. It contained innocuous pictures from some of her company events with no cause for concern. Most of the photos appeared to be taken by Madeline using her cell phone, as she was only visible in a few of them. The remaining images, presumably captured with another camera due to their high resolution, consistently featured a handsome blonde man near her. A closer examination of the USB stick revealed that Madeline had taken several pictures of the man alone, some of which showed him seated at a table with an empty chair beside him, suggesting the photographer may have previously occupied that seat. This keen interest in the blonde man seemed too deliberate to be coincidental. However, the nature of their relationship remained ambiguous. Was he her romantic partner, or simply a colleague and friend? My next question naturally became, who is this man? Madeline's photos failed to provide any evidence of infidelity or shed light on the identity of the favored individual who seemed to be in her inner circle. In the official yearbook from her workplace, I came across a folded sheet of A4 paper with a printed color image. The photo showed Madeline and the blonde man sitting on the couch and kissing. His hand was lifting her skirt, and at the bottom was the inscription, "Gorgeous legs, my dear, really gorgeous legs," signed Kim. Since Kim is a male name and the only Kim listed on the conference list was Kim Stureben, I assumed he must be a fan of Madeline. Given the uniqueness of both names, Kim and Stureben, I was sure it would be relatively easy to gather more information about this person. Although I didn't find any additional evidence in the drawer, I was convinced that Madeline was involved with Kim behind my back, which prompted me to take action, resulting in a tense Saturday. I started by looking through the phone book, which listed only 3 people with the surname Stureben, and among them only one Kim. Interestingly, Kim shared a landline with Elizabeth, but a different mobile phone number, which once again confirmed my suspicions. A new law in this country prohibits the acquisition of credit and personal information from commercial sources without a valid legal purpose, ensuring that the subject always receives a printed copy of the sold information by mail. One of my acquaintances from a clandestine group had access to a fictitious real estate company in Gibraltar, which served as the purchaser of the information, and that company was referenced in Kim's copy. There was no trace of my involvement. Despite Kim and his wife holding stable jobs, they surprisingly carried substantial debts. Apart from this, there were no apparent issues in the information obtained. They seemed like an average family with 1 child, a house, and 2 relatively old cars. In my view, the primary issue within Kim's family was undoubtedly his affair with my wife. Naturally, there was no concrete evidence of this, only strong suspicions thus far. Later, I treated Matilda to a McDonald's meal, a significant treat for young children, and then we visited my workplace where I used highly water-resistant green stamping to mark some items. I collected a small amount in a bottle before returning home. At home, I entered the workshop and purchased a syringe and needle to lubricate the clock mechanism, along with a small tube of superglue. Carefully, I opened 4 packs of Madeline's condoms, removed them, affixed a green stamp, poked tiny holes, and meticulously resealed them with superglue. Crafting 7 condoms to ensure 4 appeared flawless, I aimed to slightly soil them. Removing the waterproof coloring would be a challenge, as they couldn't use strong cleansers in certain areas. Alexander phoned me Saturday evening, expressing delight with his experience and eager to recount his day. When I inquired about speaking with Madeline, Alexander informed me that she and Grandpa had ventured out for some errands, prompting me to suggest she call back later. She didn't, indicating a lack of news. I suspected Rupert, a non-drinker, and his daughter had clandestinely visited the hotel bar for a drink. Madeline didn't call again during their trip or when they returned home on Sunday evening. She started arguing about the accident for some reason. I thought you could take care of the children for a few hours on Thursday evening, but apparently that was asking too much of you. No one can watch a child every minute. When there was trouble, I reacted quickly and appropriately. Sorry for disrupting your leisure activities. Anyway, thank you for interrupting whatever important things you were doing and coming to the hospital, I replied, noticing a flicker of fear in her expression, indicating that my words had struck a nerve. What do you mean by that? She shouted. Just what I said. I'm glad that our children are still more important to both of us than our other interests, I replied, ending the argument. Monday and Tuesday passed quickly without further arguments from Madeleine, or any attempts at intimacy from either of us. The main question in my situation, knowing for sure that my wife intended to cheat on me, was, should I drop a hint that I know what's going on so she can cancel her plans? After careful consideration, I felt it was only fair to give Madeleine a heads up, which might salvage our marriage if she wished to. On Wednesday evening, before retiring to bed, I approached her, saying, there have been whispers about a close relationship between you and someone attending the same seminar. If our marriage holds any value to you and you desire to uphold it, please refrain from any intentions of intimacy with anyone there. Madeleine's reaction was far more intense than anticipated. She exclaimed, You've lost your mind. Don't you dare lay a hand on me tonight. I had the final word, retorting, Don't fret, you've reverted to your usual self, so I have no inclinations towards that. She departed for her conference early Thursday morning, and during my lunch break I visited the court office to obtain divorce papers. Upon returning home, I checked her drawer, finding, as expected, that her box of condoms was missing. Now the only significant question is whether they immediately engaged in the activity upon arriving in their rooms, or if their schedule was so packed that they had no spare time for such indulgences. If the latter was the case, they would have had to wait until after dinner in the evening. I speculate that it happened late in the evening, as they likely went to the bar for conversation with other attendees. Additionally, did they keep the lights off? The longer they remained unaware of the ink, the more it would spread. While I took no pleasure in the end of my marriage, I found some satisfaction in the thought of their impending embarrassment. Rupert typically retired early on weekdays, so I redirected my landline calls to his number. It wouldn't matter if his slightly intoxicated and very angry daughter mistakenly woke him with frantic shouting, thinking it was me, or me pretending to be Rupert. I set my cell phone to vibrate mode to avoid disturbing myself or the children. However, it was on my nightstand and began vibrating around 11:30, repeating every 10 minutes for the next hour and a half. Before leaving the house with my children the next morning, I reverted the landline phone settings and listened to some of the voicemail messages on my cell phone. On that day, I couldn't describe my marriage as happy at all, quite the opposite, as my wife angrily berated me in her messages, accusing me of foolishness and promising retribution. She demanded I call her immediately to deal with some issue caused by what I assumed was a mistake I made. Why entertain such crude messages with a response? I had nothing to say that would appease her anyway. I couldn't ignore her calls at work for fear of inconveniencing others, so I reluctantly answered, only to be greeted by Madeleine's furious accusations. Are you satisfied now? Do you realize what you've done to me? What have I done to you? Don't play innocent with me. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I honestly have no idea what you're referring to. Are you accusing me of wrongdoing? Now she sounded stressed and whispered, The condoms, you fool. What condoms? Why are you using condoms at your seminar? Are you cheating on me? She persisted. How do I remove the color? Why are you using colored condoms? Are colored condoms different? Thanks for admitting to your affair at the seminar. You know the repercussions. Now she sounded desperate and pleaded, "Please, tell me how to remove that damn color." Don't ask me. I've never used colored condoms. Ask your boyfriend. It's his problem, not mine. I waited for her response, but she hung up. Only a few minutes later, I received a call from Rupert, inquiring about his daughter's troubles as she had called him the previous evening, clearly distraught. I informed him that she had just called me regarding some condom issue, which could seriously affect Madeline's marriage if she's using condoms and being unfaithful while away from her husband at a seminar. Undoubtedly, Rupert and his wife would have an interesting conversation about their now evidently less pristine daughter. Afterward, it was about time to add some excitement to Kim's family life, so I decided to email a copy of the intimate photo of Madeline and him to his wife, along with the following message. Dear Elizabeth Sturabin, I stumbled upon this photo in a book, and considering both your husband and my unfaithful wife were at the same hotel last night, it's possible something similar occurred again. If Kim returns home with spots of green color that won't wash off, it's from the condoms my wife used, which I modified as a trap for her and her lover. Best regards, Robert Johnson. About an hour later, Kim's wife called me for more details. Despite her pleasant and sensual voice, she made it clear that my email was a surprise, and the photo could depict an innocent situation rather than evidence of infidelity. I acknowledged her point and mentioned that nothing was certain yet, but my wife and someone else had fallen into my trap with the colored condoms, and it was likely her husband due to his previous interest in Madeleine. Elizabeth intrigued me. Her voice was alluring, but I wondered if she was a victim of her husband's infidelity, or if she played a role in it. Nevertheless, we agreed to stay in touch if she noticed any signs of her husband's indiscretions. When I returned home from work, Madeline was already there, visibly upset. Her palms were tinged green, and there was a prominent green mark on her chin and near her lip. She probably had some on her lip too, but she wore heavy lipstick to conceal it. I couldn't help but imagine the implications of the green stain. She yelled at me, "Are you satisfied now that you've made me a laughingstock among my colleagues?" I responded quietly, "No, not at all. Today has been one of the worst days of my life. A broken family is nothing to celebrate, in my opinion. Why complain when you got to spend the night with your lover? And now you have him all to yourself." Madeline looked surprised and asked, What do you mean?" "Your infidelity last night ended this marriage, and I feel sorry for our innocent children who will suffer because of it," I explained. After handing her the divorce papers, I mentioned, "Signing them or not won't affect the divorce proceedings, but agreeing to the terms now will save you a considerable sum in legal fees." Tears streamed down her face as she pleaded, "I still love you, and you're the father of our children. Please don't do this to our family. Let's try to be happy again. A devoted wife wouldn't engage in extramarital affairs, and whether I'm the father of your children will be determined by DNA tests," I responded. Madeline gasped, "Oh my God!" and hurried to our bedroom. A few minutes later, Elizabeth Sturabin called me to report that her husband had confessed to his affair with my wife, evidenced by green marks on his body. He was now hastily packing his bags. Elizabeth and I arranged to meet the next day in a park to exchange further details. I couldn't help but wonder if the hotel would bill him for the damaged bedding. I ventured into the park alone, and 10 minutes past our meeting time, a striking woman in her early 30s approached me, accompanied by a young boy. She exuded beauty, with eyes that seemed to sparkle, surprising me as I had anticipated encountering someone less pleasant. Perhaps the presence of the boy was intended to dissuade any untoward advances on my part. "Elizabeth Sturabin, I presume," I offered. "Yes, and you must be the infamous Robert Johnson who tainted my marriage with your jealousy," she retorted. Our spouses were the architects of our marital strife. It takes a truly misguided individual to betray such a lovely wife and disrupt their family so recklessly, I countered. Accepting my invitation, Elizabeth and her son Kevin joined me at a nearby cafe. After Kevin indulged in some cakes and Fanta, he found his way to a play area, leaving us adults to continue our conversation. "I must admit you're quite different from the woman I had anticipated meeting today. It's clear your husband made a grave mistake," I confessed to Elizabeth. She gave me an odd glance, then smiled and responded, "Apologies if you were hoping to meet a genuine troublemaker." I replied, "I half expected as much, but it doesn't bother me." Afterward, she was curious about Madeline's infidelity, and I disclosed the truth about the absence of background noise from the bar and her disheveled appearance when she arrived at the hospital. I even mentioned finding condoms in a drawer and adjusting their color. Elizabeth confided in me about her struggles in deciding whether to divorce or not. When I complimented Elizabeth for the third time, she seemed to have had enough and cut me off, saying, "Sorry, my friend. If you're trying to persuade me into some sort of revenge fling, you're barking up the wrong tree." I got the hint and responded with a grin. "Ever heard of love at first sight?" I'm no longer a teenager, so that's out of the question for me. I smiled and remarked, "You almost resemble a teenager. I never thought such emotions could arise at my age, but meeting you has changed my perspective on that today." Nice try, but nothing of the sort will ever occur. I understand your point and promise to remain a loyal friend amidst this situation, refraining from any attempts to take it further. "Let's support each other as friends," I assured her, and she agreed. Elizabeth's son had seen a circus poster and expressed his desire to go. I suggested we all go together the next day with our children. Elizabeth surprised me by replying, "Yes, that sounds like fun." At home, Madeline's parents awaited me, making earnest attempts to dissuade me from proceeding with my plans for divorce. I explained that while they might tolerate infidelity in their own relationship, such behavior was unacceptable in mine. Rupert didn't react positively when I thanked him for suggesting shared finances for Madeline and me, which made our divorce proceedings much smoother. Now we only needed to agree on shared custody for our children. Before I left, Rupert surprised me by asking if I was okay with him assisting Madeline in buying out my share of the house, so that the children could stay in their familiar surroundings if their parents didn't come to their senses. I agreed, but stipulated that the sale price would be determined by a fair market valuation from an estate agency. For some reason, Rupert didn't seem pleased when he realized that the house wouldn't be a bargain for his daughter. The visit to the circus with Elizabeth and her child was a great success, and the day improved even further when she invited me for coffee and my kids for lemonade and cakes after the show. While our children were playing, she asked me with a smile, "Did I offend you when that love at first sight didn't work out the way you expected?" "Love is genuine, not a trick, and I was afraid you'd see me as a foolish stalker for daring to tell you the truth," I replied humbly. She gave me a perplexed look before mentioning that Kim would stay with his parents for a week or two while she decided whether to divorce or not. In turn, I informed her that my divorce papers were ready, and my next step was finding an apartment since my in-laws and ex wanted to buy me out of the house. Elizabeth mentioned she wanted another child, but Kim refused. However, if given another chance, she wouldn't take no for an answer. I couldn't help but offer my assistance and said, "No problem at all. Let me take on that mission voluntarily, and I assure you, we'll resolve it quickly. You should understand that having a baby entails more than just conception." "Are you willing to take on all the responsibilities that come with raising a child?" she asked me. "Absolutely." Her expression turned serious as she questioned, "Are you genuinely committed, and did you truly comprehend and intend to fulfill your promise?" "I am committed and always stand by my word, but the decision is yours on how to proceed and whom you prefer to undertake it with." Our conversation was interrupted by the children, and we didn't discuss Elizabeth's plans further. Later, when I was back home and thinking about Elizabeth, I felt confident that Kim would have his second chance within a week. However, in the evening, I received a text from her asking, "Were you honest with me earlier today?" My brief response was, "Yes, I was." Legal papers will be written and filed tomorrow. I've contacted the real estate company. Having a child with you would be wonderful. The following day, I completed my errands and informed Elizabeth via text message. The real estate agency is owned by one of my associates who assured me of a fair deal. Even amidst divorce proceedings, I won't deceive my wife. I made it clear I sought an equitable and transparent transaction. Elizabeth responded, suggesting that Kim and she would convene at a pub after work to address some familial issues, hinting it might be his final opportunity to salvage their marriage if he agreed to her terms. I refrained from commenting. Meanwhile, Madeline was furious because I had initiated divorce proceedings before she had a chance to review the documents available all weekend. Admittedly, it was inconsiderate of me to seek a valuation for our house without her consent. She paled when I disclosed the potential selling price and the split of proceeds. She was justified in her reaction, but I couldn't allow her to impede our separation or let Rupert evict me from our home without fair compensation. She exclaimed, "How could you do this to me? We're still married with 2 children. Don't we owe them a genuine effort at marriage counseling to salvage our family?" I responded, "How could you betray me like that with Sturaben, despite my pleas for you to avoid it and the serious warnings I gave you the night before? No counselor could undo the arrogance and disrespect you've shown me. And now you've reverted back to treating me horribly, just like before. This behavior feels like the real you." But my words didn't matter at that moment. She had the upper hand in this situation. While marriage counselors might salvage many relationships after infidelity, everything I had professed to Elizabeth about love at first sight had been genuine for me. All my hopes and dreams for the future revolved around Elizabeth, and emotionally, I was just as much a cheater as Madeline. It was evident that Elizabeth still preferred Kim, leaving me to bide my time in the background. Even if she forgave Kim, he would soon discover that she had a contingency plan if he slipped up. That evening, Kim had a significant chance to mend his marriage, leaving me anxiously awaiting a message from Elizabeth. Just before 8 o'clock, Elizabeth's brief message arrived. "Kim and I have agreed to get divorced." In response, I wrote, "It's a major decision filled with emotions. I love you and I'm here to talk whenever you need." A minute later, she replied, "Thank you so much. Love you too. Let's discuss tomorrow." The next morning, Elizabeth called me at work to share that Kim had approached their meeting with a haughty attitude, offering little in terms of solutions. He insisted she take him back and abandon their plans for a second child, prompting her to express her preference for divorce, over continuing as they were, pretending nothing had changed. He caught her off guard by expressing his acceptance of a divorce and leaving the door open for her to reach out if she ever regretted losing him. The best man she could ever find. His confusion arose when Elizabeth informed him that he now had to vie for her affections against Madeline Johnson's soon-to-be ex-husband. Concerned, Elizabeth asked if it was appropriate for her to mention my name and if the promises I made earlier still held true. I reassured her, saying, "I love you, Elizabeth, and there's no need for us to hide it. I'll stand by my word." She sounded relieved and suggested we meet at the pub after work. Shortly after, Madeline, likely informed by Kim, called me, shouting, "Why are you having an affair with Elizabeth Sturaben instead of seeking counseling with your own wife? Are you really the one to ask me that?" Regardless, Elizabeth and I aren't involved in any illicit affair like you and Elizabeth's husband. If we do end up together, it will be in the open, I replied before she abruptly hung up. Madeline's infidelity had created an utterly bizarre situation, as she had driven a rational, ordinary man to exhaust all efforts to salvage their marriage. In some aspects, Madeline wasn't a terrible woman. She was beautiful, hard-working, held a good job, and was a good mother to our children. However, she simply wasn't the right wife for me. I found myself drawn to another woman whom I barely knew, much like a drowning man grasping for the nearest object. While it was undoubtedly a risky move, one cannot win without taking chances. When Elizabeth and I first met, she recounted how Kim had arrogantly expected her to beg for his forgiveness and plead for him to return, without any further discussion. Upon mentioning me, he had scoffed and made threatening remarks, confident he could intimidate me into staying away from her. Elizabeth had evidently gathered some information about me from her friends because she retorted, "You'd be better off asking Madeline Johnson about what Robert did to the golf pro and the greenkeeper when they both attempted to attack him together at a Christmas party at the golf club." The proud Kim, who clearly harbored romantic feelings for Madeline, had agreed to her proposal for a divorce and signed the papers she had obtained earlier that day. Then, Elizabeth urged me not to instigate any conflict with Kim. I agreed, hoping to maintain a good relationship with Kevin if I had any chance with Elizabeth in the future. Besides, harming her son's father would have been foolish given the circumstances. Before we parted ways, Elizabeth invited me to her house on Friday evening to play Trivial Pursuit with a new deck of cards her sister had purchased. I accepted, realizing it would be a significant evening in my life. While Trivial Pursuit may seem like a simple game, those who aren't well-read tend to struggle. Since Madeline had other commitments on Friday, I had to bring the kids with me to Elizabeth's house. Elizabeth's sister and her husband were a cheerful couple, making for an enjoyable evening. I won the first round, and I believe Elizabeth was pleased because it allowed her to demonstrate to her family that her new friend possessed some intelligence and common sense. The next round involved couples competing as teams. Elizabeth and I emerged as the victors, benefiting from a fortunate streak of correct answers. Truth be told, she was just as clever as I was, if not more. What mattered most to me during that round was how effortlessly Elizabeth and I cooperated without any serious disagreements. We had a great time, and her sister invited us to her place next week to even the score. As the kids and I prepared to leave, Elizabeth gave me a heartfelt hug and whispered, "I love you," in my ear. "I love you too," I replied, giving her a quick kiss. It was a step forward, but clearly there was still a long way to go. Elizabeth spent the weekend with her parents, and even Madeline did the same. So I went to a party with some single friends but ended up coming home alone from the bar. Elizabeth and I exchanged several text messages during the weekend. She called me darling and wanted to know what I had done that evening, and I told her the truth. Monday turned out to be fortunate for me as one of my colleagues had a theater package for two, which included a coach trip, tickets to a popular musical, and a night at a downtown business hotel in our capital city. She couldn't utilize it due to a last-minute, more important commitment. Without hesitation, I purchased the package from her. I then called Elizabeth and invited her to accompany me. She agreed to say yes if I could clarify the cost and any conditions attached to my generous offer. I sensed that she was concerned about possible hidden expectations, perhaps of an intimate nature. So I reassured her. "My dear, there are no hidden fees, snares, or ulterior motives. It's simply an invitation to enjoy that famous musical." "Darling, I'd be delighted," she replied, leaving me both happy and pondering whether there might be romantic involvement or if she might be reserved. Perhaps that explained why Kim had pursued Madeleine. Nonetheless, I resolved to be a genuine gentleman regardless of the outcome and let her set the pace. After comparing our schedules for the week, we couldn't find an evening to spend together, but we agreed to have lunch on Tuesday and Thursday and meet at the coach station on Saturday morning. We met, and she was in high spirits, setting the tone for what I anticipated would be a fantastic weekend, and I was right. Both of us found the musical to exceed our expectations, and our romantic dinner at a lovely restaurant afterward only added to the enjoyment. Later, we ventured to the piano bar at our hotel for a drink. Elizabeth declined a second drink and instead inquired about my thoughts on the trip so far. "It couldn't be better. I've cherished every moment," was my sincere response. Subsequently, she proposed retiring to our room to discuss some matters before calling it a night. I had reserved a room with 2 beds and acquiesced to what I assumed was her preference without objection, adopting a que sera, sera attitude. Upon entering our room, Elizabeth declared, "I love you, Robert," and took a seat on the sofa. "I love you too, Elizabeth," I replied, joining her on the sofa. She then asked, "Do you have any plans for the future, and how does Madeline factor into your plans? Could you please be honest with me because I've heard some rumors?" I informed Madeline that we're getting a divorce, and we've agreed that I'll sell my share of the house we own together to her. Naturally, there are several matters concerning our children that we need to discuss together, I stated. What about reconciling with her? Rumors are circulating that Madeline has been telling her friends that you'll take her back soon. Please, remember your promise to tell me the truth," Elizabeth said, wearing a worried expression. "I did take her back once before, just before we had Matilda, when our marriage was on the brink of divorce. I won't make that mistake again, believe me," I assured her. "I trust you. Do you have any plans for us?" she asked, smiling. "I love you and want to marry you. If you're worried that either of us might be on the rebound, we can take our time with that decision. We need to be sure about each other. Let's build our future together, but before we do, there's something I need to ask you, even though it might be difficult. Will you promise to tell me the truth?" My unexpected question seemed to unsettle her. She responded, "I promise to tell you the truth, no matter what you ask. I've been pondering why Kim let go of such an incredible wife like you so easily, without putting in any real effort to win you back. There must have been some serious issues in your marriage that led him to cheat on you and care so little about divorcing such a wonderful woman like yourself. Did you cheat on him and he found out?" I had to ask her. Elizabeth started to cry and said, "Yes, I did once when I was drunk and foolish at a Christmas party, and he's never forgiven me for it. Are you going to leave me now?" "No, not at all. What's most important to us is that you've told me the truth, so we can address any issues and start our relationship fresh. I love you, Elizabeth, and what happened between you and Kim before we met is history that doesn't concern us. Do you still love me, even though you've discovered I'm flawed like Madeline?" she asked, still sobbing. "Elizabeth, I do love you, and there's a significant distinction between what Madeline did and what you did. She carefully planned and repeated her actions, whereas you made a regrettable mistake in a moment of stupidity. Additionally, I'm divorcing because Madeline and I aren't happy together, and I feel the same way. Adultery was the final straw. Don't you think it's time to focus on our future dreams and plans rather than dwelling on the past? As for Kim, I have no intentions of engaging in a feud with him over his actions against my pride. Maintaining a good relationship with Kevin is far more important to me than pursuing a vendetta with his father. Besides, Kim inadvertently helped me by ending a bad marriage and guiding me towards a better one," I replied, eliciting a bright smile from her. "Does your vision for the future include a baby? Remember, you promised me one. Is that promise still valid after my confession?" she inquired. "I always strive to keep my promises, and I'll do my best for our baby. However, don't you think it's necessary for us to live together for a while before bringing a baby into the picture? Are you prepared for that?" I asked. "Yes, I am." "Are you?" she responded with another smile. "To succeed in important things, you need to be prepared to take risks." Even though I knew almost nothing about Elizabeth, I felt an urgent need to act. I knelt down in front of her, looked into her eyes, and said, "Elizabeth, I love you very much. Will you marry me?" Her response was unexpected, and it took her a while before she replied, "Yes, Robert, I love you too, and I want to marry you." We hugged tightly, exchanging kisses. A moment later, I gently lifted her up and put her on the bed. Our first intimacy didn't last long, but it was memorable. After a short rest, we went to the second round, and this time, it lasted much longer. After a pleasant morning meeting, Elizabeth smiled broadly and asked, "What's going to happen now when we get home?" "Stop taking your pills so we can start taking care of our baby," I replied with a smile. Although my heart was saying it, our brain understood that we were both going through a divorce and we needed to think about a lot of other issues. Madeline and Rupert purchased my portion of the house at a significantly higher price than they had anticipated, and Kim Sturaben moved in with Madeline as some sort of tenant. He became a nuisance to Rupert, constantly demanding various maintenance tasks for Madeline's house. Elizabeth and I discovered the perfect home for our expanding family, soon to include 4 children. The shared custody arrangement continued smoothly, with both Madeline and Kim cooperating. However, our town faced an unexpected turn of events just 2 months later, when the owners of the company where Madeline and Kim were employed shocked everyone by swiftly selling it to a large multinational corporation. For Madeline, it marked a significant advancement in her career as she ascended to a high-ranking position at the main office. Her new role entailed extensive international travel and relocating to an apartment near the headquarters in our capital city. In her hometown, she retained 2 rooms in her house for personal use while renting out the rest to Rupert and her mother. Kim couldn't remain in my old house with Rupert while Madeline was away, so he shared a 2-room apartment with a colleague until he found something better. His new responsibilities in the organization required frequent travel to visit clients, leaving limited opportunities for Madeline and him to see each other or maintain joint custody of the children. Elizabeth and I assumed full custody of all the children, with Madeline and Kim granted reasonable visitation rights. They even had the option to have the children every other major holiday, if they wished. The new custody arrangements came as a surprise to both Elizabeth and me, but we embraced them gladly. Sometimes I couldn't help but ponder what might have transpired if Madeline and I had been married when she received the offer for her dream job, traveling the world. Would she have chosen her career over family? I refrained from broaching such topics. Yet one day, when Madeline returned the children after a weekend visit, she caught me off guard with her words. "I'm thrilled about landing my dream job, but had I grasped the steep cost of my infidelity, I wouldn't have given it a second thought." What could I respond? I simply said, "What's done is done, and cannot be undone. All we can do now is look ahead and cherish what the future holds for us." To my surprise, Madeline then asked, "Are you happy now, Robert?" "Yes, I am. Thanks to Elizabeth, I've regained a sense of fairness in my life. Please remember how you knocked me down at the hospital, leaving me barely conscious when I realized you had just come from your lover's bed. You even kicked me while I was down, both physically and emotionally, when I pleaded for you to save our marriage instead of pursuing Kim at the seminar. But you didn't care about my feelings in the slightest. However, marriage is just one aspect of life. Are you happy now, Madeline?" I inquired. She responded in a subdued tone. "No and yes. Being with Kim was a terrible mistake that I've regretted during countless sleepless nights. But I'm happy for Elizabeth and you, for taking good care of our children, and I'm content with my life in my new job." Elizabeth and I tied the knot a week after finalizing our divorces, and she's expecting our much-anticipated baby. It's an incredible love story. I never would have imagined that the initial connection I felt with Elizabeth when we discussed our spouse's infidelities would lead to such happiness in marriage. Elizabeth and Kim's former neighbors have declined to take sides in their divorces and invited both of them, along with their new partners, to their annual barbecue. Kim showed up alone, and when someone asked about his girlfriend, he simply mentioned that he thought she was in China for business. Both Elizabeth and I got the impression that he wasn't happy at all. Throughout the evening, Elizabeth and I had a great time, which many of her old friends noticed and congratulated her on her pregnancy. Later in the evening, when I ran into Kim at the bar tent, he said, "Congratulations, you're the winner in our damn mess." I could only agree with him and replied sincerely, "I don't wish for you and Madeline not to be happy too.